Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever. We've got a full episode tonight, so we're definitely going to be talking about what's going on in Ukraine with Russia. I'll also be giving you some updates in regards to the Emergency Act here in Canada and just discussing, kind of what comes next year in Canada. And then finally, we'll be getting into our daily dose of pills as well. So it's going to be a full episode. And I guess let's just jump in right off the bat and start talking about the Ukraine situation. And before I even get into any screen shares, I guess one thing I just want to kind of talk off the top, we haven't really covered the Ukraine and essentially what's led up to this too much on the show. And to be honest, I didn't think it was going to play out this way. Obviously, like, what do I know? I'm one random dude in Canada. Why would I expect to know how it was going to play out? But certainly, I would have not guessed we would have seen the escalation the way we had. And, hindsight 2020, framework for kind of thinking the way I did was in part because we saw the Ukrainian president at multiple times kind of downplaying what seemed like fear mongering from the West and NATO. We also, we've been burned a few times in the past in regards to when America has told us that, war is imminent with other countries. But certainly there was a huge escalation of things last night. And before we even get into an update on what's going on in Ukraine, I thought let's just kind of talk through a very basic history and just a bit of a framework on how we even got here. Now, obviously, when talking about a country, we're not going to be able to do it justice in a couple minute summary, but essentially my hope here is by talking about this stuff with you guys, if nothing else, maybe it'll give you a jumping off point to go and do deeper research yourself, because again, a couple minute synopsis isn't really going to do enough. And so I'm going to start off in the 1920s. But again, there's obviously a greater history to the region of the Ukraine. And again, I guess technically I shouldn't be saying the Ukraine, but it's just Ukraine. But anyways, kind of starting in, I think it was the 1920s, right? We had the Holodomor, which essentially was the famine that was forced upon Ukraine by the USSR or Russia. And millions of people died. It absolutely devastating thing. And at the time, we had a lot of mainstream press essentially downplaying what was going on there. And that's just kind of a part of the history of constantly the geopolitics, right, coming into play and creating filters and not really allowing the general public to have real transparency or understanding of what the dynamic situation is actually on the ground. Then kind of going into World War II, but also even looking back into World War I, the Ukraine region has often been referred to as the Bloodlands, right? And understand the fact that during World War II, when the Nazis invaded the USSR, obviously in order to try and get to Russia's capital, they had to go through the Ukraine. Very complicated, complex situation in regards to how Ukrainians reacted to that, right? They had just kind of gone through the Holodomor with the USSR, so there wasn't a lot of love lost in regards to at least the way a lot of Ukrainian farmers viewed the USSR and communists. At the same time, the Nazis, as we know, they weren't necessarily any saviors either of the Ukrainians. And so this created, constant fighting in the region throughout World War II. And made for some of the messiest, bloodiest parts of World War II. If you guys are history buffs or interested in learning more about World War II, there's in fact a book even called The Bloodlands. It's right now just on my reading list. But, I've read several other books on World War II, listened to multiple podcasts on the subject matter as well. And certainly, I think that honestly, most of us that grew up in North America, we really don't fully understand how hard hit Ukraine was from, let's say the mid 19s to, post World War II. It just devastation after devastation after devastation there. And then, so, there were Nazi collaborators on some side, others, Soviet collaborators, other people just wanting Ukrainian independence. It created for a really messy situation throughout that entire period of time. Then, as we kind of saw post World War II, Obviously, the Ukraine was a very important region to the USSR, simply because now twice they had been invaded by Europe, or Germany to be more specific. And obviously, in order to get to Russia, they had to go through, Poland, Ukraine, and a bunch of those other Eastern European countries. Then, as we kind of saw things escalate in the Cold War, we saw the rise of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. And so essentially NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the Warsaw Pact, the kind of counterbalance that the USSR created in order to try and, create equal footing. And throughout that period of time, right, a lot of those Warsaw Pact countries didn't really have necessarily a choice in regards to being part of the Warsaw Pact. But I think that that's important to understand, because as we saw the USSR eventually, deteriorate or break down and eventually just leave us with Russia, a lot of former Warsaw Pact countries have eventually started shifting outside of the sphere of influence that Russia had, or the former USSR had. And understand that even when we look back to the Cold War and think about things like Cuba, right? Understand that the United States was not happy when the USSR essentially was right on the doorstep of America. And so that's why we saw, Kennedy and the standoffs in regards to the USSR wanting to place nuclear warheads on Cuban soil. And again, the reason that I even kind of frame it this way is, as we saw the Soviet Union deteriorate, particularly into the 1980s and 1990s, we eventually started to see a lot of former Warsaw Pact countries start actually shifting alliances and joining NATO, right, as they became more democratic. And the reason I bring this up is, understand that if the shoe was on the other foot and all of a sudden South America had started all flipping towards being members of Warsaw Pact, definitely America would not have liked that, right? The idea, had Canada somehow joined the Warsaw Pact, that would have been seen as a very aggressive move from the American perspective. And so, as we continue to see more and more countries start shifting into the NATO sphere of influence, obviously Russia, who'd been twice invaded through those countries, particularly Ukraine, really wanted to ensure that they continued their sphere of influence. And then NATO kind of kept encroaching upon the borders of the former Soviet Union and into Russia, or like up against Russia. And multiple times there have been kind of promises that Ukraine and other former Warsaw Pact countries wouldn't necessarily be brought into NATO. And again, I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit holes and interpretations of language and who said what, because a lot of this stuff is still sadly left to a little bit of interpretation. It depends upon which historian, which politicians you want to trust and listen to. But then kind of jumping forward into 2014, we saw the Orange Revolution, right? Where we saw a more pro-Russian president in Ukraine be ousted, and a more pro-American, more pro-democratic, at least in theory, politician come in during that revolution. Now, again, you can go down your own rabbit holes in regards to how involved was the CIA, how involved were Americans in kind of generating that. And then even talking both before and after the Orange Revolution, there's lots of theories and maybe partial pieces showed the Clintons and Bidens and several other powerful American families having significant business interests and relationship ties to the Ukraine. And so what this ends up doing is just creating a very complex situation. And like I said, I'm not going to give any real satisfaction in this little synopsis, but if there's any of these threads that you want to pull on further, I encourage you, like, jump in, start doing your own research and due diligence in that regards. Now, I'm just going to quickly hit upon some of the recent headlines within the last 24 hours, essentially, in regards to what's going on between Ukraine and Russia. And then finally, I'm also going to hit upon some conspiracy theories. And I'm not saying any of these are true, but what is interesting to me is I was up late last night, kind of saw what was going down, joining some Twitter spaces, refreshing, trying to figure out, what was fact, what was fiction. Started posting some screenshots on my Instagram stories, and it was fascinating, the sort of different reactions I got. And I got everything from like how do you think there's actually a war going on right now in Ukraine, to people saying that I was spreading fear and trying to help cause the collapse of Ukraine. And literally all I was doing was screenshotting different reporters and essentially things I was seeing on Twitter that, if not 100% verifiable, at least seem like reasonable interpretations based upon the information at the time. So anyways, I know this is a very hot subject matter, and I'm probably going to leave everyone that knows anything about it just mildly frustrated, but here we are. So the first thing, I just thought I'd pull up this map before we even get into some headlines. This is just kind of a breakdown of the NATO countries, some of kind of the adjacent members of NATO. There's like kind of different tiers in that regards. And then you can kind of see Russia here. So understand that, over time, we've seen NATO grow significantly from just the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to encompassing, lots of countries. And I certainly could understand how those that are suspicious of the West and Russia could view this as essentially being completely encircled, right? And understand, again, this isn't a perfect parallel, but understand that Germany, both in World War I and World War II, felt like they were being encircled by world powers that didn't have their best interests at heart. Here's kind of a quick little synopsis of the countries that joined NATO and when they did. So again, we can see that starting kind of in 1999 and going into the early 2000s, a lot of former Warsaw Pact members, right, former Soviet states, ended up joining NATO. And again, we constantly hear talk of potentially Ukraine joining NATO, and obviously Russia constantly voicing their concerns about that. Well, let's hit some of the headlines quickly. So this is from Global News. Ukraine says full-scale invasion by Russia underway as Putin orders military attack. Russia invades Ukraine on many fronts in brutal act of war. Russia-Ukraine conflict raises big risks for global economy. And this is a big one that I think, again, complicates the situation even further. Now, a lot of people think, hey, we'll just sanction Russia into oblivion for being a bad actor on the world stage. But that's an oversimplification, because if these sanctions last for an extended period of time, you understand that Europe gets a significant amount of their energy needs from Russia, right? I think I saw something around was it like a third of natural gas in Germany comes from Russia? I think like 50% of their oil. A significant part of the energy situation in Europe is driven based upon Russia. And as well, we've seen a lot of European countries essentially move away from, or try and move towards, more green solutions and kind of avoid nuclear as an energy solution. So again, this kind of compounds the situation. And in fact, even here in Canada and the United States, we actually do use Russian fuel as well in addition to it. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that. Now, again, it's maybe not as significant as of our total energy needs as what it is for Europe, but it's not simply, I don't think it's as simple as just dropping an iron curtain around Russia and cutting them off from all global economic trade. Or if we see that, that will certainly be an escalation of sanctions beyond anything we've seen in the past, and will absolutely, I would expect at least, absolutely have an impact in regards to the general global economy. We saw, today most markets were pretty soft. Crypto took a big beating for most of the day. From Toronto Star, latest on Russia, Ukraine, Canada. U.S. expands sanctions as Ukraine loses control of Chernobyl sites. Officials say 57 Ukrainians have been killed and 169 wounded. I believe the Ukrainian president stated that the loss of, or the attack on Chernobyl was essentially an attack on all of Europe. There's also concerns about, what if Chernobyl accidentally gets blown up, all that stuff. And again, I guess I'm probably talking in a relatively dispassionate manner for a lot of people's taste in this regards, but it's such a complicated, complex situation that I'm just trying to lay out some facts. And again, we're not going to come to any nice, clean conclusion by the end of this show. Spoiler alert. Toronto Star, why is Russia invading Ukraine? Everything you need to know. Well, I don't think that this is an all-encompassing list. This might be a decent little starting off point. If you're literally like, I can't find Ukraine on a map, this is probably a decent spot to start. So then from Zero Hedge here, Biden vows U.S. forces are not going to fight in Ukraine while unveiling devastating sanctions. So this just kind of breaks down and lists a lot of the different sanctions that are being implemented and some of the rhetoric coming out of the U.S. and NATO. So again, if you guys want to check that out, link to everything I'm sharing with you in the video description down below. And then one thing I saw make the rounds on Twitter, and while this certainly could be possible, I don't think it's necessarily practical given the time of year right now, if I understand correctly. But China might be there tomorrow, warns Chinese state pundit in dire Taiwan-Ukraine comparison. So a lot of people on Twitter were talking about, Taiwan's next. We'll see China sees Taiwan. And while certainly China has a desire to eventually, bring Taiwan back China's into China, not into China's sphere of influence, but directly into China. And one of their state pundits even kind of essentially said that get used to it. There may be more PLA aircraft fly there tomorrow. My understanding is that there's only really 2 times of the year that it makes sense if you're actually going to try and like invade Taiwan, and like with boats and stuff, because of how I guess like the weather and conditions around the straits there. So if I remember correctly, I think it's April and October are the only times that the sea there is calm enough that it would make sense to do like a large uh, uh, um, naval landing or invasion. Again, that's just my basic understanding of the situation. Um, then what I did want to highlight here, if you guys know nothing about the Holodomor famine, I've mentioned it a couple times in the past, but again, link in the video description down below. There's an amazing episode of Martyr Made that will just really paint to you the atrocities that occurred, not only in that situation, but in a lot of former, or well, like what were Soviet states that became former Soviet states. And while, again, this isn't going to give you a complete understanding of what's going on or the dynamics, I think it's amazing storytelling, and it's a part of history that a lot of us in the West are completely ignorant and blind to. So just wanted to kind of highlight that for you guys. And before we get into our pill stories of the day, again, I'm not saying any of these conspiracy stories I believe in, but I kind of wanted to highlight some of them because it is fascinating to see all the different interpretations people seem to take over the situation. So, I've seen people posting the hot take that this is just leaders playing games and they're all on the same side. And, this is just all political grandstanding from both sides of the equation. I've also seen the conspiracy theory that Russia's trying to rebuild the USSR, and this is just step one, and they plan to eventually invade all the former Warsaw Pact allies. We've also seen like people claiming this is a distraction from other issues, whether it's a distraction from Biden and his poor ratings coming into the midterm elections, whether it's related to a banking crisis, whether that banking crisis was just in North America or across the world, that it's a distraction from COVID and the fact that the COVID narrative's fallen apart. I've also seen the conspiracy theory that China and Russia essentially, are allies now, and China's going to take Taiwan while Ukraine gets taken by Russia. We've also seen Russia, or at least some Russian conspiracy theorists say that Russia is trying to denazify Ukraine, and that there's a lot of U.S. biological labs, warfare labs in the Ukraine, and that they're attacking those sites. If you guys want to go down that rabbit hole, there was a former Twitter user. He's been banned on like every mainstream media outlet now, but he was going by War Clandestine as his user handle. Again, I'm not saying any of this is true, but if you guys want to go down your own rabbit holes, I thought I'd highlight at least a handful of the popular conspiracy theories that I've seen making the rounds. And then finally, the last one is that the war is not even happening, that all of this is CGI and made up. Now, again, I don't think that any of the things I just listed are the truth. Could there be grains of truth in any and all of those stories? Who knows? It's such a complex, complicated situation. Despite the fact that we've got, social media, the internet, and mass telecommunications in this day and era, understand that it's still very easy for it's still very hard, I guess, would be the better way to frame it, to separate noise from signal. So again, I think that everything that we approach at this point in time should be taken with a grain of salt until you can verify it from multiple different sources. But yeah, that's my initial introduction to I guess the Ukraine and what's going on right now. Again, I did not see it playing out this way. Had you asked me, a week ago what I would have thought would have happened, I would have said, like, I don't know, either nothing's going to happen or we'll probably see parts of the Ukraine adjacent to Russia be carved out. A couple of those, regions that Russia's been claiming is kind of autonomous, or where, you see populations that are 90% plus Russian speakers and things of that nature. I definitely didn't see it escalating to this level. So I would literally take everything I've told you and broken down with a huge grain of salt, because I'm by no means an expert on that. Not that I claim to be an expert in much of anything these days. It seems like the more you learn, the less you know. It's a very bizarre, at least it's a very bizarre time in my life, if not a bizarre time in the world. But let's jump into today's first blue pill story of the day. So this is from Reuters. Bank of Canada March interest rate hike is a done deal, say economists. And I just want to highlight this again. We're in such a dynamic situation. I don't think anyone can accurately predict what the Bank of Canada is going to do, because understand that even just a week from now, the world may look and be in a very different state, right? We could see economic rebound if somehow the Russia-Ukraine thing gets wrapped up. We could see economic devastation if we see things escalate in a negative trajectory. One thing I will say is, had you asked me like a month ago, I would have been like, yep, they're definitely going to raise rates this month because they're going to want to pretend to be hawks. And this will kind of like buy them time for at least till the second half of the year. If I had to bet right now, I would actually probably take the opposite side of the equation. And I would say that I don't think that they're going to raise rates in Canada on March 2nd. But again, we'll find out in about a week's time. But it is interesting to see right now that mainstream media is saying that it's a done deal. Again, a lot of them at the start of this year said that we're going to see a lot of rate raises, and a lot of people were initially calling for a rate raise last Bank of Canada meeting. Then about a week before, we saw the narrative completely flip and switch, and it was really only Scotiabank and one or two other analysts that were still actually calling for it right before the Bank of Canada meeting. Next from Toronto Star, this is kind of picking up upon that Frito-Lay's story that we talked about earlier in the week. And again, this is just interesting to me. So Frito-Lay's spat with Loblaw is just the beginning. Experts say others considering stop-sell tactics as well. So if you guys are interested in learning a little bit more about how Loblaws and Frito-Lay found themselves at this impasse, this is a decent breakdown of it. Again, while they state that we've seen things like this in the past, they don't give any examples, and I definitely don't remember any examples. They're saying that this is going to become a lot more common in the future. Maybe it is. I guess it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think that unless Loblaws and other large grocery chains are going to replace the brand names with their in-house white labels or whatever, I think that they're going to need to come to some sort of agreement in order to continue to sell their goods. But it's very obvious that inflation is here to stay, in my opinion. I like anyone that's going to claim that we're going to see it be transitory, anyone that thinks we're going to see it taper off by the end of the year. I think you're wrong in that regards, particularly right now we're seeing, oil. Some of the predictions on where oil is going to go based upon this Ukraine-Russian conflict is wild, in my opinion. They're talking about like $135 a barrel. I think right now we're bouncing around the $100 a barrel range. I think that we're going to see inflation continue to set unprecedented levels, right? We're going to continuously be hitting 30, 40-year highs, in my opinion. Now from the Globe and Mail, why are so many Canadian kids unvaccinated against COVID-19 despite ample vaccine supply and appointments? Now, it's just interesting to me that, okay, we got the Emergencies Act over. Let's go back to the COVID narrative and start beating Canadians over the head again. I encourage you guys to read this entire article. But one thing I'll say is I don't think that this looks that I actually think that it seems like a lot of kids are vaccinated, right? So this is COVID-19 vaccination, first dose uptake for children 5 to 11 years old. And so we can see that every province except for Alberta is at 50% or more. To be honest, that seems like a pretty good uptake, particularly when you look at what risk is COVID-19 to 5 to 11-year-olds. And, how really effective are vaccines in this day and age with this variant in regards to reducing transmission. I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit hole, but what is interesting, they actually break down a lot of the different regions in the provinces, just kind of showing the different vaccination rates. And again, if you're just kind of curious, here it is. But we're going to keep rolling here. Now, from Post Millennial, agency says Ontario gas prices set to skyrocket over the weekend. If you haven't bought your gas yet and you're the sort of person that likes saving money on gas, you're probably going to want to buy it today or tomorrow at the latest. Although it was under $1.60 here in my Northern Ontario region, which was impressive in my opinion, so I filled up. Canadians for Affordable Energy have issued a warning to the media that prices at the pumps across Ontario may spike yet again in the next several days, possibly even crossing the $2 per liter mark. Now, that's fucking expensive. I don't know what else to say about that. But in addition to that, I think that if we do see it actually cross that $2 a liter mark, particularly in large urban centers, I think it's probably more likely it's going to be in fringe areas of Canada that we'll see it hit that mark. But if we see it past $2 a liter in like the GTA area and things of that nature, we're going to see a lot of talking points coming into the provincial election. And I think we're just going to see a lot of general debating about inflation and things of that nature in Canadian Parliament as well. Again, link to this story in the video description down below. Now let's switch gears and get into some red pill stories of the day. This is from Substack. So Michelle Rempel Gardner, I went to Davos. The World Economic Forum is not running Canada. So one, I think it was brave of Michelle to even want to write this article. So props there. However, I encourage you guys, like, read this entire article, and even under the most positive light here, I don't think it paints the World Economic Forum in a good light. And if this is what someone that participated at least in a few WEF events is willing to say out loud, I can't help but feel like, well, what's the people that are deeply ingrained in that organization thinking? But I'm just going to read some of the highlights here. But again, I think it's worth reading from start to finish. Its stated mission is to engage the foremost political, business, cultural, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. The WEF probably could be better described as a left-of-center think tank and lobbying facilitator that hosts annual meetings in the Tony Swiss ski resort of Davos. Well, right off the bat, we're talking about a global lobbying group, right? A global think tank. So I think anyone that already is concerned about, a one world government or, multinational corporations having too much influence on individual nation states, this all would still be concerning. It may not point to a cabal of evil people that drink blood and want to sacrifice human babies, but it definitely still, it still is what it is, right? Like, this is what's in the light of day when we're talking about WEF. Now talking about the Great Reset. So the paper suggested that global pandemic recovery efforts could be used to alter many global institutions in a way that leftists would favor. It was released in June 2020 at a time when much of the world was sitting in fresh pandemic lockdown measures. The Great Reset was published by a global organization best known for the secrecy of its elite members during a time when fear about COVID and its response dominated global media. In other words, it was a Molotov cocktail launched into a rapidly brewing gas bid for conspiracy theories regarding the origins of COVID. So again, it's just interesting that, like, you're telling us that this isn't a cabal of evil people, but, like, yeah, they're very secretive. They are elites. They do have an agenda, and they want to essentially use the pandemic to manipulate global institutions. I feel like the lighter versions of the conspiracies that I read about, this is almost like tick for tack what they state. The WEF is certainly elitist, but to my eyes, it fell far short of being a cabal bent on global domination. At the same time, if you're saying that their goal is to essentially lobby and impact nations and global institutions, I mean, if they impact and lobby enough, wouldn't they be dominating those global institutions? Video also emerged of Klaus Schwab implying that the WEF had influence over attendees who had secured roles in the cabinets of several countries, including Canada. In fact, he claimed he had penetrated more than 50% of Justin Trudeau's cabinet. Now, while Michelle in this article goes on to essentially say that, like, hey, look, this was probably just them trying to, like, puff themselves up to seem more important than they actually are. At the same time, it's hard to not think that that word penetrate is specific in language, particularly when you're talking about using or when that organization is willing to talk about using a global pandemic in order to institute its policies, regardless of whether they have anything to do with the global pandemic. Further on, I took his reset comment. So this is in regards to Justin Trudeau now using the term reset during the UN. I took his reset comment at the UN meeting not as a mark that an evil supervillain had got to him, but rather as a suggestion that he knew the language of the WEF and wanted an invite back to the Davos party scene or help with a high-profile post-political gig. Again, this sounds like WEF has significant influence over our prime minister if he's essentially focused on using their talking points in order to impress them. Further on, where conspiracy theorists are correct to note that the WEF is elite and opaque, that is its nature. It literally bills itself as an elite club. Rather, they are wrong to assume that a legislator in Canada could be influenced in all matters simply by attending a conference, receiving an award, or reading a badly conceived white paper. In Canada's democracy, we are accountable to the needs of our constituents. Are you, though, really? Does it really seem like Justin Trudeau feels like he's actually accountable to the average Canadian when he's willing to paint such a broad brush and call such a large group of Canadians a fringe minority, that they're racist, misogynist, that they're anti-science, that they're anti-vaccines when they're really anti-mandates and lockdowns? Again, it's just interesting because this is the argument saying that the World Economic Forum shouldn't be viewed as a conspiracy theory. And I find a lot of these points to be on tack or on point with a lot of the more mundane conspiracy theories I read. So again, encourage you guys. This is worth reading the entire thing, and I'd love to get your thoughts, your opinions, and feedback in that regard as well. Now, from the Globe and Mail, despair about affording a home has this immigrant to Canada wondering what kind of country we're trying to build. And just want to read one quote here and then give you a bit of context. What kind of country are we trying to build here, he asked. Are we just going to build a country of landlords and their kids owning most of the homes, or are we trying to build a place where people come to work and live, and enjoy? Well, right off the bat, it's very interesting that we're focusing on landlords because to me, landlords are just economic actors the same way that essentially anyone else is. And they're just responding to the feedback loop that is the way our economy is structured, right? I personally believe that we're going to see the demonization of landlords over the coming decade. I think that if landlords aren't very careful and if landlords don't start getting involved in policy at the local, provincial, and federal level, it will be to their long-term detriment. Because I think that we're going to continue to see the mainstream media and a lot of populist politicians focus on demonizing landlords. But what I do find interesting is that this individual that's essentially cited in the article, he lives like his landlords live above him. So it's not like his landlords have this sprawling, massive real estate empire. It literally sounds like they've got an income suite. And I think a lot of people are actually turning to income suites and mortgage helpers, renting out portions of their house or property in order to be able to afford the asinine prices that we're seeing in the Canadian real estate market, which are completely unjustifiable, except for the fact if you understand how our monetary policy works, right? And I think the much bigger question is here, not talking about, small landlords and their kids owning all the real estate, but looking into institutions like Blackstone, right? These giant hedge funds, these money managers, they get money essentially for free from the government and then go use that money in order to compete against the average citizen. Honestly, the further you go down central banking and, printing press goes burr and all that stuff, the more black-pilled you're going to be on our financial institutions and the general way our economy is currently structured. And until we honestly fix the money, we're not going to be able to fix any of these problems. We might be able to treat some of the symptoms temporarily, but we're always going to have the underlying issue of a fiat-based currency. That's why you hear so many Bitcoiners say, fix the money, fix the world. Now from the Toronto Sun, Parliament's $100 billion small business relief program mostly went to large corporations report. Just going to hit a couple of these points, but again, worth reading the entire article. Thus, it may be better for the smallest businesses to close rather than to continue operating, said the report on the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program and business survival and growth during the COVID-19 pandemic in Canada. First of all, we couldn't turn that into an acronym because that's a very lengthy title. But secondly, when they're looking at it and they understand their program's not helping small businesses, and they're like, yeah, it probably is going to be best for you just to shut down. But only 29% of small operators with fewer than 5 employees receive subsidies under the program. Stats Canada said 13% of small businesses closed. By comparison, 61% of large corporations with more than 100 employees receive subsidies, and only 2% of them closed. Now, while it would have been nice if this article would have compared it to a pre-pandemic environment, right, in regards to what those rates of closure were, I think we've talked about it in the past in a previous story. We are seeing small business bankruptcies and closures like skyrocketing here in Canada. I think we covered that last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. It's shocking to me that we're up to 34 episodes, to be honest. But we're going to keep rolling. iPolitics, what defending freedom really means in Ukraine or in Ottawa. I encourage you guys to read this entire article, but I could barely get past the second paragraph in this because, again, they're just going right back to their narrative. How the requirements to follow public health measures like wearing a mask or submitting to mandatory vaccinations in the middle of a global pandemic was somehow an attack on our fundamental freedoms took a bit of mental gymnastics. No, it really doesn't. When you're forcing medical procedures on the population, it doesn't take any mental gymnastics to be like, oh yeah, that's infringing upon my freedom. WTF is all I've got to say. Like, every single individual that pretends that they want to see amending of the fences, that they want to see, us come back together, but then continue to spew this language in mainstream media and in their opinion pieces, it's very obvious that they're just happy that the truckers went home. And now they're focused on, again, trying to gaslight everyone into, you were never really free in the first place, so stop your bitching. No, I'm pretty sure I was born free, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys were born free as well. And we're not going to give that shit up, regardless of how much you gaslight us, how much you demonize us. It doesn't matter. Born free, die free. All right, but enough of the red pills. Let's go deeper down the rabbit hole and get into some black pills. And actually, all three of today's black pills are from Blacklock's Reporter. You guys have heard me talk about it in the past, but I think they're doing some of the best reporting in Canada. I strongly encourage you guys to go support them with getting a subscription. But just want to highlight this. Blacklist was okay at Fed Bank. So this is in regards to Farm Credit Canada. So, however, Farm Credit Management had begun compiling a list of names of account holders suspected of involvement with the Freedom Convoy protests against vaccine mandates. Consequences for customers named in police blacklists included suspension of loans. So again, Farm Credit Canada was actively creating their own list, right? In addition to what was provided by the RCMP. And remember how we were talking about in the past how the politicians were like, we only gave the RCMP a specific list. We didn't give them a list of all donors. But again, I from day one was questioning like the exact the specifics of the language they were using, right? Because they're going to gaslight us into believing that like, oh no, we weren't actually freezing grandma's bank account. We weren't freezing the small farmer's bank account. You're all crazy. The RCMP didn't do that. Yeah, we never said the RCMP did that. We said that you did it, right? The politicians, the bankers, and the RCMP, that one of those three levels were involved in the freezing of these accounts. Farm credit customers who volunteered they joined Freedom Convoy blockades or fundraising were not to be told their accounts were under review. Tips from informants were welcomed. So again, this is turning neighbor against neighbor. Banks and financial institutions have been given immunity from liability under this new act, said Senator Pamela Wallin from Saskatchewan. Appealing to your bank or the police or the courts is probably not going to resolve the matter, and it is costly. And if your resources are frozen, then it's not even an option. Again, it's worth reading this entire article, but this is very frustrating because I think most of us that were paying attention, we were called conspiracy theorists when we were saying that banks were freezing small businesses and small individuals' accounts. Now, again, they're either going to say those were accidents, the RCMP didn't do it, but it doesn't matter. Bank accounts were being frozen, and banks essentially were given carte blanche because they couldn't be held responsible for their actions. Now, again, from Blacklocks, see blueprint for future acts. So, first ever use of Emergencies Act to quash the Freedom Convoy movement will set a federal precedent for years to come, legislators warned yesterday. Liberal and conservative appointed senators called it government overreach. Again, because this was being used essentially as a preemptive measure, or at least that's the interpretation that some of the senators were taking. What is driving this movement is a very small organized group that is driven by an ideology to overthrow the government through whatever means they may wish to use, Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino told reporters February 15th. Mendicino would not say how many conspirators were in the very small group or detail evidence of sedition, but called it nefarious. Again, they believe that they're above having to provide proof for their actions. And this should concern all of us because that's not how democracies are supposed to work. Final black pill from Blacklock's Reporter. no time to rewrite speeches. And I don't know why it highlighted the opposite of what I want to highlight on this article, but essentially understand that like at 1:30 p.m. yesterday, we had senators in the Canadian Senate saying what a existential threat truckers were to Canada, right? And then within 3 hours, we had Trudeau saying, "Hey, we're done with Emergencies Act." So you've got a group of senators essentially saying this crazy shit like the truckers wanted a race war and were scared that they were going to be forced to speak Hebrew if they didn't cause a race war. I shared that video yesterday. And then 3 hours later, we've got Trudeau being like, yeah, I'm bored with this toy. On to the next thing. Um, Cabinet abruptly Cabinet's abrupt suspension of Emergencies Act orders yesterday came so suddenly. Liberal appointees in the Senate were continuing to warn of anarchist plots to topple Parliament, even as the threat was downgraded to an ordinary police measure. We need the full power of the state, said Senator Bev Bussin, a former RCMP commissioner. These occupiers are by definition anarchists, said Bussin. They are professionally led, well-funded, and skillfully planning the downfall of our democracy. They use children as human shields. And this is so concerning because, again, these politicians, these senators, the mainstream media, they are so confident that they're going to be the ones writing the history book that they've got no concerns about just straight up lying about the actions of the Freedom Convoy. And then 3 hours later, after this lady says this shit, Trudeau, all of a sudden, it's no longer an emergency. What the fuck happened in those 3 hours? Now, let's move on to some wild clown pills. And I swear to God, this is real. This is from Louder with Crowder. Watch, Hollywood actress declares if she was Putin's mother, none of this would be happening right now. I don't know if I even should play this silly. Let's play it.
Dear President Vladimir Putin, I'm so sorry that I was not your mother. If I was your mother, you would have been so loved, held in the arms of joyous light. Never would the stories plight the world unfurled before our eyes, a pure demise of nations sitting peaceful under a night sky. If I was your mother, the world would have been warm.
This is just like, honest. This feels like it should be parody, but to the best of my knowledge, this was a sincere reaction to what's going on in Ukraine. That had he just had a more loving mother, that all the geopolitics of the world, all the history that led up to this moment in time wouldn't have mattered, and Putin would be, I don't know. I guess he'd be hiring his first trans general in the Russian Navy as well, similar to what the United States is doing. It's just wild. Now, this is an even more bizarre clown pill, in my opinion. This is from the Counter Signal. Romanian soccer team bans the vaccinated. Yeah, you read that right. Literally, the owner of the soccer team now is banning the vaccinated because he believes they're weaker than the unvaccinated. This is an overcorrection too much in the wrong direction. How about we just let people be people and we don't worry about their vaccination status and we just go about society doing our shit? Again, just wild. But if you want to read the craziness here, link in the video description down below. But enough of the clown pills. Let's get on to a white pill here. And what I want to share with you guys, if you haven't checked it out, this was shared in the past in the Problems or Profits Discord under the resources section. And I encourage you guys check out and join the Problems or Profits Discord. Lots of great people sharing amazing resources. But this is open source ecology. I think I might have shared this once in the past, but it's worth bringing up again. Essentially, the whole idea here is they're helping create a blueprint for civilization so that we can rebuild it ourselves should we ever need to. Or if you're just looking to become truly sovereign and independent, you or your local community. Again, amazing resources. The whole idea here is that you'll essentially, on a very limited budget, be able to have all the tools and necessities in order to create, if not all the conveniences of modern society, at least the large portion of the most important conveniences of modern society. And again, they've got literally like a spreadsheet you can check out and get into details. Really cool stuff. Encourage you to check it out. They've also got workshops and things of that nature. So again, link in the video description down below. That's actually a really fun rabbit hole to go down. And then finally, for our meme of the day, I thought this was pretty good. So me and Bitcoin, right? So essentially, be greedy when others are fearful. So while right now Bitcoin is taking a beating in the financial markets, nothing has fundamentally changed about Bitcoin. Nothing has fundamentally changed about the fiat Ponzi scheme that all global governments are using in regards to essentially steal the wealth of their citizens. So again, have faith, hodl, and once we fix the money, hopefully we can actually fix the world. But that's it for tonight's show. Appreciate you guys watching. Smash the like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel, all that good stuff. I think I've even got a button I can push now to do it. If you guys hate watching this show on Big Tech, I don't blame you. I do upload it every night to Rumble as well as BitChute, so you can check it out there. You can also follow me on Gab. I'm not doing much on Gab right now. I'm more of just a lurker. But if you guys, started interacting with me, maybe I'll start posting there as well. And let's jump into the chat and see what everyone's saying here. Appreciate you guys spending your Thursday night with me. So we've got Farzana, we've got Bang, we've got Peter, we've got Rise Above. Peter says, never expected we would see all this craziness in my lifetime while growing up as a child teen. It certainly feels like, someone bought an expansion pack to the simulation and they're going all out using all the crazy little DLC content. Abdul says, just another story of world leaders toying with everyone's lives like they don't matter one bit. Yeah, that's probably one of the best summaries in regards to what's going on in the Ukraine. It's again, I've got no idea how things play out, but I'm certainly sure that the average Ukrainian citizen will be worse for what's going on right now. Sadly, only poor, ordinary people are going to suffer. Yeah, I agree with you there. Hasn't Biden escalated this? Is Russia not trying to protect itself? That's possibly true, Jennifer. I think at this point in time, it's so hard to understand what the hell's going on. I don't know. Literally, no goddamn idea. I'm throwing up my hands in despair, and it's unfortunate we find ourselves in this place. But unlike our clown bill of the day, I don't think had Putin had a more loving mother that we wouldn't find ourselves in this situation. I still think global political elites would still be playing their games regardless. Tony says, a funny thing, though, conspiracies have come true in some areas. It's healthy to look at all stories on a subject. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it, right? I think that right now, though, we live in such an upside down world, such a clown pill world, such a age of hilarious, as we talked about yesterday, that it's easy to almost want to take the most extreme narrative or headline you see and automatically assume it's true. And I think that does a disservice to your interpretation of reality as well. There's nothing wrong with looking at the full spectrum and then trying to parse out what is true. I suspect a lot of the time you have to pull different threads in order to actually pull together any sort of cohesive narrative. Peter says, YouTuber Johnny Harris, old reporter for Vice News, dives deep into this when Russia put all the troops on the border a couple weeks back. Appreciate the recommendation. It's a great breakdown of the history of Russia losing Kiev and why it's important to Putin to get back. Yeah, it's definitely that is an aspect of it. Again, understand that most world powers want buffer states or the states around them to essentially act as satellites or be in their sphere of influence. Ukraine-Russia situation is also a hiccup of European Union recognizing Kosovo's break from Serbia. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really been thinking about that, but I appreciate you bringing it up. Klitschko is going to go in with boxing gloves and deliver some uppercuts. We'll see. Not sure what that means. Potato chip cravings are transitory. No big deal. Love it, Graham. Yeah, you'll soon forget that Lay's chips even existed. To be honest, like the fact that Lay's aren't on the shelf in grocery stores, that's probably a net benefit for Canadian society. But it is very much a sign of the economic times we live in as well. Basmatic says, not sure what happens, looks or feels like anymore. Yeah. Or what happiness, sorry. Yeah. Not sure what happiness looks or feels like anymore. Yeah, it's bizarre, and it can be easy to get caught up and be blackpilled on this shit. I'm as guilty as anyone else in that regards. It is important that we always, catch our breath in these crazy times, focus on what we can control. So again, we can all control our individual financial situation, our individual health situation. We can control our who we allow into our personal sphere of influence, right? So you guys have heard me talk about in the past, but you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Well, you don't want to be surrounded completely by black pillars or people that are always black pilled. I think it's healthy to be exposed to those ideas and be open to those concepts. But at the end of the day, we do want to eventually find our way to the white pill, right? And focus on what we and ours can do. William says, this war has been going on since 2010. Ukraine was default on IMF loans that helped build the pipelines. Russia offered to pay the debt, fall of Kiev in 2014, and the signing of the Minsky Protocol. 4 more years of corruption. In comes Zelensky. Trump's people is looking into the previous oil and Biden connection. The U.S. government under Obama was running a confidence scheme in Ukraine. They give him aid, and then money would be sent back to the U.S. Yeah, there's definitely there's such a long list of shenanigans going on that there almost comes to a point where you're just like, there's too much. I don't even know how to interpret everything, or at least that's how I kind of feel. Peter says, this reporter is either delusional or lying in regards to the statements about WEF versus the facts they are reporting. Yeah, and that's actually a politician, right, that was talking about WEF there. JJ Clem says, rat on your neighbor. Attitude is just downright suicide. It's definitely not a high trust society. And when we look at long-term successful human organizations or societies, being in a high trust society is far better than a low trust society. And what we get when the government, the politicians, the mainstream media aren't truthful, aren't transparent, aren't authentic with us, is we all start questioning everything. And that starts creating division amongst, neighbor versus neighbor, the idea of brother versus brother. And it's important to understand the parasite class is honestly the real enemy here. There are bad people with bad intentions that may not be in the parasite class, but the parasite class, the politicians, the elites, whatever you want to call them, they're responsible for far more of the collateral damage and evil going on in the world than, the random person down the street that gave $50 to the truckers. Jimmy says, it's banks supposed to keep the money safe. Or Bees Bank. I'm not sure what that means. Sounds like East Germany when they welcome people informing on each other. Absolutely. Aislinn says, we live inside the Truman Show. That's very possible, but honestly, the Truman Show seemed very squeaky clean, didn't it, compared to the world that we find ourselves in today? JJ says, Christia Freeland knows everything about Germany. Maybe that's why Canada is so much alike. Yeah, so we covered that briefly in the past. Where essentially her father was part of, I'm forgetting now, but was it the Polish, like the media in Poland under Nazi occupation? Abdul says, lost that there. Abdul says, Jesus Christ, leave it to celebrities to make a war about themselves. Shake my head. Yeah, it is bizarre that she believes that, she's such a good mother that simply had Putin had her as a mother, that we wouldn't be under the circumstances we find ourselves in. Would your opinion on, I'm not sure. Hodl Hard says, Adam JD Martin. Hey, what's up, Adam? Chick-fil-A would not let me dine in because I did not have a vaccination card. Are restaurants in your area denying you to dine in? To be honest, I just don't eat out at all, so it's not an issue that comes up. I imagine they would. I've heard of some local restaurants that ask for your vaccination card. Every store I go into, even the banks these days, I don't wear a mask, and I haven't had any serious issues. Walmart is probably the craziest reaction I've got to date. And again, it wasn't really that bad. Honestly, if anything, I think it's healthy, right, for us to get used to a little bit of confrontation. So many of us, myself included, are often coddled in these echo chambers where, like, the idea of someone even approaching you and being like, sir, can you put on a mask? I think that honestly, the reason we see such a high compliance amongst Canadians is they're scared of that interaction or confrontation. Adam says, thanks for the incredible content, Matt. Appreciate it. Richard says, hey, Matt, would your opinion on vaccine mandates change if COVID killed a greater number, say 1 in 10? That's a great question, Richard. Honestly, it wouldn't, but probably my desire to get a vaccination would change dramatically, right? Again, I would still want to see it up to the average person to make their own medical decision, but I would assume that if literally, like, if 1 in 10 people I knew died from COVID, I'd be like, yeah, like, how much worse could the vaccine be, right? Even if it hasn't gone through the proper trials, even if all the data is not being made available to us right away, yeah, give me the shot, right? If it had a 1 of 1 chance of killing me, the disease, then yep, let's absolutely take a shot with the shot. So I think that's a very fair question to ask, Richard. And again, my political position, my morals and ethics aren't going to change under those circumstances, but I suspect we'd see the average person change their opinion, right? I think when we're dealing with a 99.9+% survival rate for those that aren't in at-risk categories, it's just difficult to see the justification, right? Again, under no circumstances am I actually okay with the justification, because I think most people would simply embrace it, right? Like they would just be like, yep, hey, I already saw someone die in my life. I want it right now. Go live on Rumble, so much better. Appreciate the suggestion, JJ. I'm open to it, but I understand it actually costs money to go live on Rumble or Gab. And right now, like, I barely get any views on Rumble. I actually get more views on every episode that I upload to BitChute than on Rumble. So again, if you guys convince me that enough of you will actually watch it live on Rumble, I'm open to doing that as well. Steph says, glad to see you in such a good mood. Thanks for keeping us informed. Absolutely. Again, I think I could be in a much better mood, but a little bit less black-pilled, I guess. So that's good. Joined late, but hope you got to touch on Taiwan tonight too. Interesting smoke screen everywhere. Much hard to connect all the data at once. Yeah, we did touch upon it at the start of the show. Again, I think that, like, I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I think logistically speaking, if I remember correctly, it's much easier to invade Taiwan from China in April or October. So if they are going to do it, I suspect it would likely be when the straits are at their calmest, because that would make for a naval invasion to go a lot smoother. And I think one big thing, actually, before I even go on, that I meant to mention, like, you know, Russia invading right now. I saw like some hot takes on Twitter that made it sound like they thought this was like a flip of a switch, as in, like, you know, just yesterday Putin changed his mind. No, like, there's that classic saying that armies march on their belly, right? Like, logistics is what wins wars. Soldiers may win individual battles, but it's logistics that are really going to, like, win the war. And so this obviously had to have been in the works for a significant period of time. I'm sure they war gamed or planned it for years and years and years, but certainly this isn't something that you would do lightly, right? Elizabeth says, Lay's chips are produced in Cambridge, Ontario. Laugh my ass off. JJ says, 250,000 troops on border. You know, that's only 10% of his active and deployed troops. The Western Great Reset is in trouble. Yeah, it is important to understand that, like, Russia is certainly a force to be reckoned with, but at the same time, when we're looking at their GDP, they're like the size of Italy. In fact, I think their GDP is technically smaller than Italy. So while they've got nuclear capacities, a large standing army, and they've definitely got military infrastructure, the idea that I've seen, like, some pundits saying they're going to sweep all the way to Poland or things like that, certainly, at least based upon my current interpretation of reality, seems like a far stretch from likely. But who the fuck knows? I didn't see us getting to this point in time. So you should take all my perspectives with a huge dose of salt. Rose says, how much did they give the government? Not sure what that's in regard to, but I'm sure that regardless, government corruption exists everywhere. So I bet a fair bit. Key tip for those who joined the live late, start video from beginning at 2x speed until you catch up. Yeah, that's often what I do when I'm watching, you know, YouTubers do their thing as well live, and I end up joining late because it is fun to kind of fully understand what the hell's going on. But appreciate all you guys that joined, whether it was at the start or the end of tonight's broadcast. You know, smash the like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. As well, if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can do so. Matt McKeever Unfiltered. Oh, I got my arrow wrong there. Matt McKeever Unfiltered. And as well, I'm on Gab, Twitter, all the different platforms. And love to see you guys there as well. And yeah, that's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. Appreciate you guys. And we'll see what crazy shit goes down tonight and tomorrow. And let's play ourselves out here.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Red fire, math, able scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and